the 16th of October 2017, the flag of Kurdistan was lowered over the city of Kirkuk, replaced with the Iraqi flag. The Peshmerga, the military wing of Kurdistan that had held the city since 2014, were forced into a retreat by a dual assault led by the Iraqi National Army and the PMF militias, and a city considered widely as a Kurdish capital was taken by a state opposed to any idea of a Kurdish state. The seizure was the product of long-standing tensions between Iraq and the push for an ethnic Kurdish state. And amidst the chaos, it is important to ask the question, how did the loss of Kirkuk in October 2017 damage the internal legitimacy of the Kurdish independence movement, with here legitimacy being defined as groups or actions considered acceptable by conforming to agreed laws or democratic principles? Control over Kirkuk, the capital of the Kirkuk Governorate of Iraq, had been the source of animosity between Kurds and Iraq for over a half-century. The city is significant to Kurds as a cultural capital, and strong economic pressures are also present due to the oil deposits present within the region. The oil could provide additional strength to the state of Iraq. However, alternatively, it could also accrue legitimacy for a Kurdish state, as despite agreements over the Kurdish regional governorate, the question of the city of Kirkuk was left ambiguous. Kurdish-Iraqi relations were also inflamed by Ba'athist policies which had been implemented by Iraq within the city since the 70s. Ba'athism defined as Arab nationalism that promotes the creation of a unitary Arab state, with Iraq financing Arab families to move into the city and have children, increasing the ethnicity's population and reducing the Kurdish claim to the city. The catalyst for the seizure came in 2017. After 3 years of Kurdish occupation, after the Peshmerga took it from ISIS in 2014, the Kurdistan independence referendum was enacted, and a 93% vote in favor of Kurdish independence emerged. Considered by the Kurds to be binding, Iraq swiftly declared the referendum illegitimate and gave the Peshmerga a deadline to evacuate the city. Upon having the deadline ignored, it sent in the Iraqi National Army and the PMF militia to take control of the region by force. The case study is significant in exemplifying the difficulties of attaining nationhood in an increasingly stratified 21st century world. The region of Kurdistan operated autonomously from Iraq for half a century. Nonetheless, its attempt at statehood was still viewed as illegitimate by the government. It is a clear security-based political issue. The military action by Iraq had significant security repercussions within the region on multiple levels. It was a flagrant use of hard power in combination with a structural realist policy, which is defined as regarding state power as the most important aspect of international politics, aiming to preserve the state power of Iraq, which would be threatened by the creation of a sovereign Kurdish state. It is a stark reminder of the importance that military power still plays in world politics. The impacts of the seizure were manifold. The loss of the Kurdish ancestral capital was a huge blow to the Kurdish independence movement. Internal divisions rapidly formed, with rival Kurdish groups accusing each other of having abandoned the city, despite there being a defense erected by the local Peshmerga. The loss of the Kirkuk Governorate also undermined the economic basis for a movement, as the loss of the oil fields amounted to a loss of the only real economic asset that the movement possessed. Additionally, a wide-scale exodus of Kurds also emerged out of the seizure, with an estimated 100,000 fleeing the city and the violence perpetrated by the Iraqi National Army and the PMF militias. The seizure of Kirkuk reasserted Iraq's hardline stance on any form of Kurdish independence, and the military victory achieved by Iraq emphasizes the state's power over Kurdistan. Additionally, the taking of the city and the subsequent exodus of the Kurds represents an affirmation of Ba'athist policies that Iraq had been implementing for decades. It was a significant blow to the Kurdish claim of the city by further imbalancing ethnic demographics and swaying away from a potential Kurdish electoral victory, which could potentially allow them to win back the region. The access to oil wells also grants an economic advantage to the Iraqi government, worsening the power inequality between the two states by robbing one of its only real economic asset while strengthening the other, in this case, Iraq. The Kurdish response was splintered, reflecting the heavy damage the loss of the city had incurred on the Kurdish independence movement. Masoud Barzani, the Kurdish president and the active proponent of the independence referendum, resigned shortly after the Peshmerga lost control of the city. Kozrat Rasul, the vice president of the Kirkuk regional governorate, decried occupying Iraqi forces as, quote, invaders, a statement which resulted in the Iraqi Supreme Court calling for his arrest. Some attempts were made by Kurds within the city to boycott local elections, undermining Iraqi control over the region, though, as previously stated, the mass exodus of Kurds from the city, in addition to the Ba'athist policies implemented for decades to decrease the Kurdish population of the city, were likely rendered these boycotts for 2 elections ineffective. Iraq's response, on the other hand, was one of rapid and decisive consolidation of seized territory. The mass exodus of Kurds strengthened their grasp on the city, with the primary ethnic opposition fleeing. They also accused Kurdish authorities of bringing fighters from Turkey's Kurdish Workers' Party to Kirkuk, an unverified statement that they nonetheless called a declaration of war. The international response to the seizure, on the other hand, was divided along various allegiances and ideological ties. Iran and Turkey both praised Iraq's move to, quote, restore peace and stability to the country, including Kirkuk, reflecting the state's own turbulent history of the Kurdish ethnicity, pushing them to align themselves with a state that took a decisive stance against Kurdish state push for independence. The USA, France, and Germany all called on groups to avoid further conflict, reflecting an uneasy position. They neither endorse nor condemn the cause of Kurdish independence, but instead wish to maintain the current status quo. Thus, they are averse to supporting either side of the conflict. Curiously, Israel was the only internationally recognized state to truly support the Kurds, with the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu lobbying world powers to halt any further setbacks to the Iraqi Kurds as they lost territory from the seizure. Significant in understanding the case study are also the interpretations and theoretical perspectives that underlie the actions of the Iraqi government and the Kurdistan independence movement. The Kurds view Kirkuk as their cultural capital and thus essential to their statehood. The seizure of the city was seen as an illegitimate action by the Iraqi government that deprived them of a city of extreme significance. They have always viewed Kirkuk as a semi-independent entity only under the aegis of Iraq, likely as a result of the treaty's ambiguity signed long ago. Thus, they view their call to statehood as legitimate, a view only strengthened by the outcome of the 2017 referendum, with a 92.70% vote in favor of independence out of a 72.16% voter outcome. In meeting the challenges of emerging statehood, the Kurdish independence movement has adopted a smart power strategy. The taking of territory by Peshmerga in 2014 from ISIS reflects a strongly realist position, taking advantage of international anarchy to make territorial gains and increase the strength of the Kurdish state. However, the referendum enacted in 2017 could be seen as an example of a soft power strategy, a term coined by Joseph Nye, in fostering international legitimacy and recognition of a Kurdish state via a democratic process. Here it is important to acknowledge that Kurdistan, and by extension the Kurdish independence movement, are not a monolithic entity. It is a series of many different groups united under the idea of a unitary Kurdish state. Thus, the smart power strategy may not be a deliberate choice by the Kurdish independence movement to adopt some hard and soft power strategies, but may instead be a product of a lack of unity and division within the groups. Iraq views Kirkuk as rightfully belonging to the state. The 2017 referendum was never binding to begin with, and thus Kirkuk is still well within their territory and under their jurisdiction. This plays well with their long-term strategy of destabilizing Kirkuk and attempting to provoke a demographic shift by financing Arab families to move into the city, thus attempting to make it more theirs. The Kurdish regional governorate's initial reporting of the referendum as non-binding, but later as binding, reinforces the perception that the referendum was by its nature illegitimate. The threat the state of Kurdistan will represent to the state of Iraq engenders a decisive and swift realist action, in this case a military intervention, leveraging the power imbalance between the two states, with Iraq enjoying military and economic superiority as well as greater international legitimacy to swiftly crush the emerging threat of a Kurdish state. It's an example of a security crisis on multiple levels. The personal security of Kurds within the city was threatened by crimes committed by the Iraqi National Army and PMF militias. Regional stability and conflict provoked by the intervention are an example of regional security being threatened, and the destabilization of the emerging state of Kurdistan and, to an extent, Iraq are an example of national security being put in jeopardy by the intervention. The case study is significant in exemplifying the struggles of emerging nationhood and the power dynamics that underlie such a process. In an increasingly stratified global political network, based off of the interplay of established states with NGOs, new states continue to struggle to gain legitimacy on the international stage. Indeed, in recent years, there have been many examples of emerging statehood that have failed. The Scottish 2014 independence referendum and the Catalonia 2017 Declaration of Independence were both resolved through political means. However, in the case of the Kurdistan 2017 referendum, it was defeated through the application of military strength. The case study provides an insight into the might makes right aspect of statehood, emphasizing the precedence that realist power takes, in some cases, over legitimacy and liberal policies. Despite declaring itself independent through seemingly legitimate means, in this case a democratic referendum, Kurdistan was defeated through a swift military intervention, proving, to an extent, that hard power still plays a crucial role in coordinating international politics.